Hello, everyone. Welcome to the November Palisades Neighborhood Association Board Meeting, and all neighbors are welcome. We have a special guest, Jessica Numanoglu. Numanolu, so the G is silent, with the city development department and community development. And she'll be giving us a presentation about a number of factors that we've been very, a number of neighbors and board members have asked for clarification and explanation of a variety of things the city is doing. And Jessica is going to answer our questions and be able to tell us what's going on. And before we do that, Rob, would you like to take roll call, or have you already written it down?
I've written it down. I can read it really quick. So I have Chair Frederic, Joe, Jenny, Nancy, Rick, Jessica, Meg, and myself.
Thank you. So we've lost Jessica. So we'll just hold on a second, and she might be having technical difficulties. So since while we're waiting for her, does anybody else have any announcements that they want to make? All right. So looking at my agenda, I will give the update, waiting for Jessica to get back online. I'll give the update from Carrie about updates on the recent volunteer recruitment webpage. I'm gonna try to share my screen. And, oh, there's Jessica, she's back. Okay, good. All right, Jessica, I'm gonna, is everything okay now? Great. So yeah, we've finished taking roll call, so we're ready for your presentation, and we are very grateful that you are giving us your time.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And again, I am so sorry for the technical difficulties. This is so frustrating, but I will proceed and hopefully be able to explain well enough for you to kind of understand without having my slides. And there were a few that had just words on it anyway, so I think that's fine. But again, thank you so much for having me. My name is Jessica Numanolu. I'm the Community Development Director for the city. The Community Development Department is planning, building, and code enforcement. And so those are the programs I oversee at the city. And I've worked for the city for almost 24 years. So some of you look familiar. I know, of course, know Rob Heap. He was on our planning commission for a long time. But I'm really happy to be here and to kind of introduce myself and get to know you guys and what your issues are in Palisades. So Frederic asked me to cover sort of three broad topics. One was land use. Another one was an update on the parking reform that we've been working on, which is also known as CFEC, or Climate Friendly and Equitable Community Rules. And then also middle housing. I know that there were some board members that were kind of wanted to know, what is middle housing and how does that affect sort of residential lots in your neighborhood and actually throughout the city. So those are the three broad topics that I'm going to talk about. I think that I've covered some topics that will be your board will be interested in, but if there's anything else that, once I'm done that you want to cover, feel free to ask me anything landing or land use or planning or building related. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. So starting with land use, what I wanted to cover was the state legislation that our department has been working on for the last 4 years and will keep us busy for many years to come. It's been pretty extensive. I haven't really seen anything like it in the time that I've been at the city of Lake Oswego. And then I'm going to cover some of the planning department work plans, our work plan items that we're going to be working on for the next couple of years. So in terms of state legislation, beginning in about 2019 is when we started to see an uptick in legislation around planning and land use. And in particular, it's to address both our climate, the fact that we have climate change that's happening. So that was part of what the bills, or actually it was an executive order, was to address. And then also our housing crisis. As you know, housing in Oregon, we've had a historic underproduction for a number of years, and housing costs are rising, and it's become into kind of a full-blown crisis. So the governor has taken action and made it one of her priorities to address housing production in state law in the last few years. So it started out with HB 2001, which first required cities to allow middle housing in all residential zones that allow single family development. So that was a requirement for all cities over 25,000, which the city of Lake Oswego is. We have over 40,000 population in the city. So we were required to comply with that, and we did. We completed our requirement, which required us to change our code to allow middle housing in all residential zones. That was done in June of 2022. HB 2003, which was also from 2019, required cities to adopt what's called a housing needs and capacity analysis, as well as a housing production strategy. This is work that we've been working on for the last couple of years, and your board may have been paying attention to it. We've had a lot of outreach. We've had a task force. We've been to the Planning Commission and the City Council. And the good news is that we're almost done with it. The City Council tentatively approved our housing production strategy on November 5th, and is slated to adopt the findings, which would adopt the final plan on November 19th. So that is a huge milestone for us. The housing needs analysis basically looks at housing needs for the city over the next 20 years. And we have to account for housing that meets all of the city's needs in terms of affordability, in terms of housing types. And what we did find in our housing needs analysis is we will have a deficit in 20 years of buildable land. And so we are going to have to do something in our housing production strategies to address that, because we don't have enough land to accommodate the housing that we need in the future. And so there's really only two ways to deal with that. You either annex in more land, which means expanding our urban growth boundary, or you rezone, which means that you allow more density in certain zones. So our housing production strategy, which I'll talk about here in a minute, does not propose that we expand our urban growth boundary, because we all know we have our Stafford urban reserves, and there's no talk or plan to bring that area in anytime soon. So we will be looking at a rezoning strategy to target certain zones to potentially add housing as an allowed use that's not currently allowed, or increasing the allowed density in those zones, which I'll talk about more in a minute. The climate friendly and equitable communities requirement, that was from 2020, and that was actually an executive order from former Governor Kate Brown. And it basically requires cities to amend its parking regulations in order to encourage more climate friendly development and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute, so I'm not going to get into details here, but that is something that we've been working on for over a year now, and we are required, our deadline to adopt those standards is the end of this year. We are on track to complete that. We have a city council hearing that's scheduled in December to adopt those CFEC amendments, which I'll talk about in a minute. Most recently, we had a Senate Bill 1537, which was passed in this last legislative session in 2024. And this one was very worrying to the city because one of the requirements of Senate Bill 1537 was that the city was required to approve variances to zoning and design standards. And there's a specific list in the bill. It's not everything, but it is a huge list of, like things like setbacks, lot coverage, open space requirements, design requirements. The city had to basically approve variances to that if the developer or builder met certain criteria. And it only applies to housing, by the way. It's not to everything. It's only to housing. The cities lobbied really hard to legislatures to make sure that if this was going to apply, that we are at least going to get something from the developer in terms of more housing units and also, or potentially more affordable units. And that wasn't originally built into the bill. So the cities were successful in getting the legislators to change that. So one of the qualifiers in order to qualify for these exemptions is that you have to show that you are meeting a minimum density requirement. So the good news is it doesn't mean that your next door neighbor who tears down their small single family dwelling and builds a monstrosity now doesn't get a bunch of variances to do that. They would actually have to provide more units in order to get that. And the minimum number of units is 17 dwelling units per acre, which if you're looking at like the R10 zone, which I know there's a lot of that in the Palisades Neighborhood Association, you'd have to have at least 3 units before you could even qualify for those variances. But the city council has given direction to staff to apply for an exception to the state requirement, because they did build in an exception that says if the city has its own process that allows all of the adjustments that are listed in the bill through the city's own process, then they can get an exception to the statewide mandate for those variances. So we are going to apply for that. It's due by January 1st. And if we get an application in, because that's when it becomes effective, is on January 1st, then we don't have to apply the state adjustments. So that's what we're going to be working on over the next couple of months. We're very grateful that there's an exception process in there, because we don't think that would work well here in Lake Oswego. The other thing that Senate Bill 1537 did is it created a Housing and Accountability Production Office. And this is a state office that's sort of made up of the Department of Land Conservation and the Business and Consumer Services Department. And essentially, it's an oversight for cities to make sure that we comply with state law. So it allows builders and developers to submit complaints to this department about if the city is not complying with Oregon housing laws. We have been assured that even though it is sort of an enforcement agency, they're really the first priority is for them is to work with the cities to gain voluntary compliance. So they aren't going to bring down the hammer on us right away. If we aren't, taking care of it in a timely manner, or we aren't being cooperative, then there is some enforcement that they could take. But my understanding is that they want to work with the cities and assist the cities, including providing technical assistance. They have grants available to help cities comply with state law. So that's good news in that they have a more cooperative approach to getting cities to comply, but it still is a concern, because the last thing we need is a bunch of builders and developers complaining to the state that we have to basically follow up on and address when we have a lot of other things we need to be working on. So that office is supposed to be operable in July. And so we'll see what happens. At this point, we don't know what to expect, but it is something that is new that we are keeping an eye on. As far as the legislative session that's coming up, it's going to start in January. It is a long legislative session, and we don't know what it's going to cover. We do know from I attend League of Oregon Cities meetings, which is a lobbying group for city governments in Oregon. And essentially what what they have told us is it looks like the legislation is working on concepts that would sort of refine some of the middle housing laws that have already been in effect. Now that they've been in effect for a while, there's little glitches here and there, so they want to do some fixes to those laws. I don't know what they are yet, but we'll see in this when they start their legislative sessions. The other thing is they want to address trees, which was very concerning to us. We were pretty sure that they're not looking to override cities' tree ordinances, but I think that the state is looking for ways to make it so that tree regulations are not causing unreasonable costs or delays. So I don't know what that's going to turn out in the legislative session. Maybe nothing will come of it, but it's something that we're definitely keeping our eye on. And then we do know that they want to address infrastructure, which is really critical to housing. You can't have housing if you don't have sewer and water and roads and sidewalks. So my understanding is that's going to be a big priority for the upcoming legislation as well. So as far as what that means for the planning department's work program, we have a hefty list of items that we're going to be working on. So the first thing is we're going to be implementing the housing production strategy that the council is poised to adopt on November 19th. The first step in that is community development code audits and amendments. And basically that is part of our housing production strategy. And what we're looking at is doing a very comprehensive review of our development code. We're going to hire a consultant. There's going to be a lot of public outreach. And the idea is we're trying to identify areas in the code that either is a barrier to housing or adds a lot of cost for housing, and looking at ways that we can refine or remove those regulations, but still meet our community standards. We don't want to throw our community standards out the window, but what are ways that we can kind of address the barriers to housing in the city? So that is going to be one of the projects that we're going to start in 2025. Another one that's from our housing production strategy is looking at the possible rezoning of non-residential land in the city. And that would be things like looking at zoning that doesn't currently allow housing. The only zoning that I'm aware of in the city is our mixed commerce zone, which is kind of, I don't believe it encompasses any of the Palisades neighborhood. I think it's mainly Lake Forest and potentially Westlake, but the Meadows Road area and the area out by the highway, that area is zoned mixed commerce, and it does not currently allow residential use. So one of the things we could look at is allowing that as a use in the zone so that you could have mixed use development that includes both residential as well as commercial. Another thing that we could look at in terms of quote unquote rezoning is we have some zones, and the one that comes to top of mind for me is our office commercial zone. And this is an area around the Yakima building, if you know where that is on Cruiseway and Boones Ferry Road. In that area, there's some office commercial that has a lot of offices and tons of surface parking. So, but it's surrounded by existing infrastructure, right? We have roads, we have sewer, we have water, we have amenities. And so that could be an area where we could increase the amount of floor area and potentially lot coverage that's allowed in that zone, because residential is already allowed, but it has really restrictive floor area requirements and other things. So that's another way where we could kind of raise those limits to promote sort of either residential housing or mixed use type housing. So it looks like somebody's asking a question, would we allow conversion of office to residential? And the answer is yes, absolutely, that is allowed. I will say that I have heard that can be hard to do that because retrofitting an office to residential can be quite expensive because there are different building code requirements for those different occupancies. And in addition, the plumbing is totally set up different than it would be for residential. So retrofitting the plumbing can be really cost prohibitive too. But we have seen it. And I'll be honest with you, I've had at least one inquiry, I don't know how serious it was, of somebody asking about that. So it might be something that we could see in Lake Oswego. Other things that we're working on, the tree code update. So this is something that I know that a lot of people are interested in and they're keeping their eyes on. We actually have a study session with the council coming up on November 19th. And this is a really early scoping study session with the council. So we're just kind of giving them a broad scope and saying, does this look right to you? If it does, then we're going to move forward with selecting a consultant and getting that project started in early 2025. So keep your ears out for that, and definitely watch or attend the November 19th City Council meeting if you want to learn more about that tree code update. I mentioned before that we're going to be applying for an exemption to the Senate Bill 1537 adjustment, so that's on our docket. It's possible that when we apply that DLCD requires us to amend our code because we may not fully have all of the processes we need to cover all the variances listed in the bill. And if that's the case, we might have associated code amendments associated with that exemption. We're also just starting the process of our annual CDC amendments. This is just kind of housekeeping that we do on the code every year, just to kind of keep it up. We just had a study session with the Planning Commission about that last night. And then, of course, council has its goal setting in January. And so we may have additional work plan items that come from the city council, but I would say right now we've already got a full docket. So I don't think we have a lot of capacity, but obviously council goal setting will be important for us too in terms of what we're going to be working on for the next couple of years. So I'm going to move on to the CFEC update. The Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities program, as I mentioned before, was an executive order by Governor Kate Brown, and it requires the city to basically implement a couple of phases to address, in a phased approach to address greenhouse gas emissions, essentially. So the goals are really to direct development into mixed-use centers, making walking, cycling, transit safer and more convenient, and providing people with access to services, and also to reform parking, because at least the philosophy is that more parking leads to more driving and more greenhouse gas emissions. So the city is required to comply with this. And there's two phases. There was phase A, which we've already complied with. And essentially what that required is any lots that are within, or any land that is within a certain distance of what they call frequent transit, we cannot require any minimum parking requirements. And so for the city of Lake Oswego, line 35 is considered, oddly, frequent transit. And that is, line 35 is generally comes into the downtown area, the main downtown area, and then it also goes down Highway 43. So since basically January 2023, we have not required any parking in downtown, in First Edition, most of First Edition Forest Hills, and along Highway 43. The other thing we're required to comply with, which we've already done, is to require electric vehicle conduit to be installed for multifamily projects. It doesn't require them to actually install the charging units, but it requires them to be wired for it so it can be easily converted, because it is pretty expensive to do that. So we've complied with that since March of 2023. Parking phase B requires us to basically choose one of three options. And it's all aimed at trying to, okay, I got another question here. And I'm going to save the question to the end, because I just want to make sure I stay on time and respect your time, and then I'll get to the question at the end. But essentially, we have to pick three options. One option is we just repeal all minimum parking mandates. And if you do that, you essentially pretty easily comply with the rules, although there's a few other things that we have to implement. So we still have some associated code amendments that we'll have to comply with. Like, for instance, we have to require maximum parking, and they have specific standards for parking lots that are over a half acre that we have to adopt, that make sure that you're either putting in trees, so you can kind of, that kind of mitigates the heat island effect, because you don't want these giant parking lots with, no tree cover, or you can install solar panels. There's different ways that you can mitigate for large parking lots, but we have to essentially adopt those types of standards. The other two options were, I'll just sum it up by saying, incredibly complicated. And essentially, it would have required us to have different parking standards for different areas of the city. So you would have areas like downtown and Lake Grove that would have absolutely no parking requirements. But then just outside of those, you'd have parking requirements. But then we'd have to have a paid parking program for our on-street parking in downtown and in Lake Grove. And we'd have to regulate things like what they call unbundling parking for multifamily, which basically says they cannot provide free parking for multifamily. You have to charge for it. So you have to kind of unbundle the parking from, so that you're kind of, you're giving people the choice of opting out of paying for parking, essentially. So it was quite complex, and we got direction from the city council early on that they wanted to move forward with option one, which is repealing all parking mandates. Incidentally, this has been the most popular option that we've seen most cities choose, because the other two options are just so complex and arduous to implement. I will say, I can't spend a lot of time on this because I don't have a lot of time, and this is quite complex. But I will say that just because we are not requiring parking does not mean that developers and builders won't provide it. We have a more suburban type development out here, particularly in Lake Grove. So I think that you're going to see that even when folks have to, when they build new developments, that they're still going to provide parking, even though it's not required technically by the city. So I'm going to move on to the final subject, and again, trying to stay on time here, which was middle housing. So the big question that I heard was folks maybe didn't understand exactly what middle housing was. This is where my slides would have helped, because I had some examples, some photographic examples. So I apologize. I'm happy to send you my presentation later on when I figure out how to get back into my email account. But essentially, what middle housing is so first of all, it's allowed in all residential zones that allow single family. So it's going to be allowed in all of our low density zones. So our 7.5, R10, R15 zones, which Palisades is primarily those sort of low density zones. All of those zones technically allow middle housing as an outright permitted use. It's also allowed in our medium and high density zones as well. And in terms of what middle housing is defined as duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters that are located in residential zones. Triplexes and quadplexes, that's pretty self-explanatory. They just have 3 units or 3 to 4 units in a structure. If it's located on one lot, those are more likely to be rental units. So if you think of like a triplex where it has a unit that's on the top, a unit that's in the middle, and maybe the unit that's in the basement, those are more likely to be rental because you can't really split those up. Quadplexes can all be on one lot too and be rental units, or quadplexes could also be what we call townhomes. If you actually put a lot line in between the walls, they have to be side by side. You can't have them on top of one another, but they're side by side units. Then those are townhomes, and those actually can be for sale units because they're located on their own lots. So a quadplex and a townhome can look a lot alike, is I guess what I'm saying. And the only difference is really whether they're for rent or for sale. Cottage clusters are the ones that people are kind of pretty interested in, and what we've seen the most interest in Lake Oswego since we adopted the middle housing regulations. And this is basically a cluster of minimum of 5 and a maximum of 8 houses on one lot. We do have a minimum lot size requirement. In order to do a cottage cluster, you have to have at least 7,000 square feet or more. But provided you meet that, then you can have 5 to 8 cottages located. The footprint of each cottage is limited, so it's you can't have more than 900 square feet. And depending on the zone you're in, the average square footage of all the cottage units are limited to between 1,000 and 1,200 square feet. We also have different setback requirements for cottage units. It's like 10-foot setbacks from all sides. We have requirements for a common courtyard that the units have to front on. So I won't get into all the standards, but you get the ideas that it's just a bunch of smaller units that are clustered on a site around a common courtyard. This type of development, all middle housing, is intended to meet 3 kind of objectives for housing. The first is production. Obviously, if you're allowing more units, you're getting more units, so you're producing more units. So, and if you're producing more units, eventually, when you get a number of them, it's going to help bring the housing costs down. But I don't expect that these are going to be affordable with a capital A. We would like more affordable housing. That is another objective. But to be realistic, it's probably not going to happen unless you at least subsidize the housing. And so it is truly affordable with a capital A, or we have enough sort of units that are produced that it starts bringing housing prices down. So people say, well, I don't think these units are going to be that more affordable. Well, you're still getting more production, and more importantly, you're getting housing choice. Because one of the issues that we have is, and you may have heard this from, maybe you're experiencing it yourself, is there's a lot of people who have 3,000 square foot homes. Their family they're empty nesters now, but they can't afford to move anymore because the housing prices have raised so much that to sell their house and buy another one to downsize, it's more expensive, than what they paid for their original house. So they can't afford that. And people don't want as much space. So these cottage clusters are a great option for people to age in place, for instance. And they are going to be generally more affordable than, the house that, is 3,500 or, 2,500 square feet, et cetera. So that's kind of why middle housing was being allowed. It's that production, and it's that housing choice were sort of the main objectives, and the affordability will come later. As far as how middle housing fits in within our existing residential zones, the way that we set up the code is that the standards that apply to a single family dwelling also apply to middle housing. With the exception of cottage clusters, which have their sort of unique site development limitations like setbacks and height and all that kind of stuff. Middle housing otherwise has to meet the same standards that a single family dwelling does. So the idea is that these should fit pretty well in the neighborhood, even though you're probably going to see more cars, you're going to see more trips, but in terms of the bulk and massing of it, it really should be similar to what would have been allowed for a single family dwelling. And we do get a lot of big dwellings here in Lake Oswego, as you know. And then in terms, and this is my final point, in terms of what we've seen for middle housing since we adopted those standards in 2022, it was really slow going. We didn't really have any applications for a while, and we were kind of wondering, I wonder if anybody's going to do this in Lake Oswego. Maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense. But slowly what we've been seeing the most interest in is cottage clusters, which kind of surprised me. I actually expected, duplexes and triplexes maybe to be more of interest to developers, but it's really been cottage clusters. Right now we have 3 cottage clusters that are in review or will be soon under construction in Lake Oswego. One of them is in Hallinan, and it is for a 5-unit cottage cluster. And we have 2 in First Edition Forest Hills. And I think one of them has 8 units, and the other one has between 5 and 8. I can't remember what it is, but they happen to be right across from one another. So we've been hearing a lot from the neighborhood about that, but it'll be interesting to see what these look like when they're done. And what kind of prices they're going to be selling for. I'm very curious what that's going to look like. And then, of course, you all are very well aware of the former C3 church site on Stafford Road, where the builder is looking at potentially doing a subdivision with several middle housing developments on there. I think he was originally going to look at rezoning. He seems to have backed off from that, at least as far as I can tell. And is looking at doing multiple middle housing developments on that site. So no application yet. I think he had a pre-application conference with staff, but no formal application has been submitted. And so we'll kind of see how that pans out. But that concludes my presentation. Again, I'm so sorry I didn't have my slides, and I do know that we have some questions, which I'm pulling up here on my chat. Jessica, do you think there is enough public transit in Lake Oswego that will encourage enough residents to not have a car? Or do you anticipate a parking problem on residential streets? Well, that is an excellent question. And it's very much a chicken and an egg issue, right? If you don't have the density, it can't support the transit. But, you know, you also don't want to have density when you don't have transit. So it's a really difficult issue. I will say that as we get more density, we will be looking at getting more transit to the city. As far as whether or not that will encourage residents to not have a car, I can tell you that what we have heard is that people tend to self-select. So if they're in a unit that doesn't have a car, it's generally people who don't have cars will look for those units. They are leased or rented out. In Lake Oswego, I think there's areas where you could do fine with not having a car. Probably in the First Edition neighborhood is a great example. It might be a little bit more difficult in Lake Grove unless you worked there, but there are a lot of amenities there. So we'll just have to see how that pans out. And then what was the other part of the question? Sorry, let me go back to the chat. Or do you anticipate a parking problem on residential streets? I don't anticipate it right away. What we know is that we haven't been requiring minimum parking in First Edition, and really not a lot has changed because it takes time for development to happen. But we are, for instance, seeing those two cottage clusters that are going in. One of them didn't provide any parking, and one of them is providing parking. All of them do have a lot of on-street parking around them, although I think a lot of neighbors would say there isn't a lot of on-street parking, but they're technically, it looks like there is going to be enough parking there. But at some point, it's going to become a problem. Like if we do see a lot of redevelopment and nobody, or not very many of those developments are providing parking, then it will become a problem over time. And that will become a management issue. So that's something that the city will have to address. And there's various ways we can do that. We can require permit parking, right? We can basically not allow parking during certain hours. So it's like parking management type thing. We can do that in our residential neighborhoods if it comes to that. The city could also look at providing more public parking available. And that's something that we've talked about. The city has talked about in Lake Grove as an example, providing public parking garages there for those uses. So yeah, I think eventually the city is going to have to work on parking management. And Robert, Rob Heap, I see you have your hand up.
Oh yeah. So maybe to follow on to parking, I had a couple of questions related to that.
Yeah.
One was that we actually got a new bus route that's serving McVeigh and Stafford Road.
That's right.
153, and myself, as the rest of the P&A, we advocated for that. So we were happy to see that went in. One of the things we noticed though is that as you're going southbound on McVeigh from like downtown towards like 205, but particularly by the rec center and by the high school and by where Rastique Park, there's no stops there. Is that going? Do you know if that's going to be changed? Are they just not putting stops in because it's under construction, or that's kind of a disappointment that, you know, the stops aren't really serving that kind of new area, because we wanted to address some of the traffic concerns and some of the parking issues by having public transportation like that.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, Rob, but it's a great question. And I would think that once the recreation facility is open and, you know, Receipt Park is already mainly open, but obviously there's additional phases that are going to be happening there. And especially if that C3 church site is redeveloped, right. Well, that would seem to me like logical for them to put in a stop. So I would guess that's why they haven't yet, but I'm happy to look into that and find out more about that.
The second question was with respect to the state legislation and the parking mandate that's coming out. Do you know if there's going to be an exception like what we did with middle housing? The exception in middle housing was that if there was an HOA in place that had in CCRs that you know, mandated only single family homes could be built, then those maintained, you know, those were kept in effect.
Right.
Is there any HOA exceptions or any other exceptions to the kind of parking requirements, or the repeal of the parking requirement?
To the parking requirement, no, there isn't that exemption. But I will say this, and it doesn't apply to HOAs, but if there is a like a commercial building that went through a design review, which most of them had to do that, and it required a minimum amount of parking, that still is going to apply. And so in order for them to once the new code goes into effect, to no longer require the parking, let's say they wanted to convert their parking to, I don't know, they wanted to build housing on their surface parking or something like that. They would actually have to come in and apply for a modification to their land use application. So it's not it doesn't automatically go away, but there is no built-in exemption into the CFEC rules for previously existing CC&Rs.
I think maybe one final question on parking. I've been working with the PNA board here, and then with Anthony Vanderberg from the Lake Oswego School District about parking concerns we have around Lake Ridge High School. In my discussions with Anthony, he mentioned that he's been having discussions with the city regarding enforceable no parking signs, and that the city stated they wanted to take a broader look before allowing any signs to be installed. Are you kind of familiar with those discussions? And the other part of that is, actually, when I was on the Plan Commission, I had actually brought up, which was kind of surprising to hear you say this earlier, was maybe the possibility of allowing permitted parking in Lake Oswego. I didn't think that went over well, that people weren't really willing to do that, but I definitely thought that was a solution to issues we're having like at Lake Ridge High School, is to go to permitted parking. Yeah, just to summarize, that last question was, are you familiar with discussions that are happening between Lake Oswego School District and the city with regards to the parking? And the second part is like, would we be able to consider permitted parking?
Yeah. So it's our engineering department is really deals with parking, and they have the city engineer basically has purview over the public rights of way. I am aware of the issues and the complaints that have come in around parking around Lake Ridge. I am not personally involved in those discussions because the planning doesn't really get into the management of the right of way. That's really our engineering division. As far as doing a permit program, I don't want to speak for the engineering department, but I know that is a big undertaking for them to do, and it would involve both our engineering department as well as the police department. I don't know what the feasibility of that is. When I mention permitting parking, I'm thinking sort of long-term in the city as we get more dense, and if we see less on-site parking, we're going to have to come up with a parking management program. But I just want to make clear that I have not heard anyone say that is something that is going to happen in the near term. So continue to work with our engineering department. I wish I don't want to speak for them. I don't want to get ahead of them, but I am aware of the concerns and issues that have been happening out there. Nancy.
Yeah, mine's more of a comment than a question. With dense areas like downtown Lake Oswego not requiring parking, more people will be riding their bike or walking. I think it would be important to complement that with the Pathways project to make safe pathways. For those of us in Palisades, if we want to walk to downtown Lake Oswego, we're going down McVeigh, which has no sidewalks. It just has a painted line separating you from traffic. And across the US, pedestrian injury and death is up tremendously. So I just want to throw that out as another element that you should consider.
Absolutely. And it's something that, is a big issue here in Lake Oswego, because a lot of our streets were built under county standards. And so they don't have the infrastructure that we need. They don't have sidewalks and stormwater facilities. And, sometimes a lot of times the pavement width is inadequate. So yeah, it is a big issue. And what we tend to do with our when we approve a new development, so for instance, if someone divides their lot, we will often require frontage improvements, but those little piecemeal sections, they take a long time to connect. But I know, and of course our capital improvement program has way more projects than we have money for. But I do know it has been a priority of the city council for several years now to work on pathways, and I don't expect that to change. So to the extent that we have the funding available and we can tackle those projects, I know the council is prioritizing them.
Thank you.
I just want to emphasize that as well. Our treasurer is not here tonight, but he often almost gets hit walking daily on the street and tells us about it. So
Yeah.
we talk about this as a family friendly, wonderful community, but we need sidewalks. We need a place to walk. And if you don't want us to be in our cars, we need access to all the areas to get downtown and around without a car and a vehicle. And that doesn't exist right now. So it's not you, but what do we need to do? Who do we need to advocate with? And who do we need to talk to make changes in that area? I think you've been there you said 24 years in your role. So
Yep.
You probably know the ins and outs. What are we not doing that we should be doing as a neighborhood association to help advocate for this?
Yeah. Well, when we're running a city, that we have competing priorities, right? We have all sorts of things that we need to take care of. And so it really boils down to what are the council priorities. And so it's the city council is the one who sets our priorities. They oversee our budgeting. And so, if we're going to, of course, I don't want to make everything seem like it's a zero sum where it's like one thing loses and if you move your money over here, but it is a little bit like that, right? So they do allocate funding for pathways, but we have such a great need in the city that it's really difficult to address all of them. So I know that one of the things that the council has been prioritizing is safe routes to school. That's what they've been focusing on in the last several years. But if there are certain areas that are of particular concern in the Palisades neighborhood, letting the council know about those, I think is really important, and that's where you really need to advocate for, and getting those on our CIP project list and getting them funded is how they get done.
What you said, the CI project list?
I'm sorry that. I don't mean to use an acronym, Capital Improvement Project.
Okay.
Yeah.
You used another acronym before, and maybe I got it wrong, but it was in regards to parking reform. You said CPAC, it was climate friendly. Oh, go ahead.
CFEC, CFEC, which
CFEC, a climate friendly
and equitable communities.
Equitable community. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any other questions for Jessica? Meg, I know you had been concerned, but I assume that you have your questions answered or you would be raising your hand, correct?
Yep, you're correct.
Okay,
Jessica addressed all of them. Thank you.
thank you so much, Jessica. I really, really appreciate it. And uh, when we publish this video, it'll help inform a lot more people. You've done a good job of explaining it.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too.
Next on our agenda would typically be John Thies to give a treasury update. And since he's not here, I'm not sure what's happening, but he's not able to join us. And so the next item would be to approve the meeting minutes, but which Rob Heap would do, but we don't have a quorum. So I think I will put it up on our project management software of Basecamp and ask people to vote on it that way so we can get it up on the website and also in our newsletters. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay, let's move on to committee reports. Nancy, do you have anything for parks or land use? on
I do
Chris's-
for parks. Chris didn't pass me any notes for land use. But I did hear from Kira Haggart with Parks and Rec. I asked about next steps for Reseek now that we have our $1 million from the state for the picnic shelter, playground, etc. And I'm reading her statement. We're currently in the process of obtaining building permits, finalizing construction documents, and getting contracts in order. The grant contract will go to council on the consent agenda next Tuesday, 11/19, and then we can get a notice to proceed from the state for their grant. We are still planning to begin construction this winter or spring and have it open sometime next summer. So that's the latest on next steps for Reseek.
Thank you for staying on top of that. You had something else there, Nancy?
I just wanted to add, and I didn't get this from Kira, but walking at Lesher Farm, we've probably all seen the wooden farm fences, those low fences are falling apart. There's a sign there now saying that they'll soon be replaced. So within the next 6 months or so. And when I spoke with Ian at a gathering 6 months ago, he said they would be composite fence posts with black pipe laterals. So that's what it'll move to.
Thank you.
So Nancy, are they going to be similar to the ones that are currently at Reseek? That are kind of along the parking lot? They're kind of cool looking.
Yeah, I think I didn't really look at them, but I think that's the convention they're using. So probably I'll have
They'd
to go
look
take
much
a look.
nicer.
Yeah, much nicer. The thing is they're durable since they have the composite posts. So they
Yeah.
won't rot like the current wood ones. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Any other questions for parks? I want to sort of dovetail Rob Heap's traffic and pathway report with what Jenny and others have brought up about South Shore McVeigh needing safer walking and maybe new or additional sidewalks and such. Is that something that we, maybe Rob and Jenny want to work together
Sure.
for, or what,
Yes.
how do you guys feel?
A couple comments on that is one on McVeigh and Stafford, as I was mentioning, we kind of anticipated increased pedestrian traffic and from just the development that was going on. And so again, that's why we're advocating for that new line 153. I was actually surprised when they added it. So for people that are coming from Palisades to downtown, I would highly encourage them to take the bus if there's concerns about kind of the pathways. For South Shore Drive, yeah, that's a different issue. We actually lost the bus route there, which I think was bus route 36.
Yeah.
Lost that. And so South Shore is a little bit tougher a problem.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll add is, when I was in the Plan Commission, as chair of the Citizens Community Involvement Commission, I think was the name of it. But it was the commission that oversaw all the neighborhood associations. And I won't throw any certain neighborhood associations under the bus, but I was kind of the same opinion that we're hearing in Palisades. It's like we need safer streets, we need sidewalks, we need pathways. And so I was going to some of those neighborhood associations that didn't have that and saying, hey, we should really push for this. We need to get in. And they pushed back. They actually didn't want it. They said they liked their kind of rural feel to their neighborhood. And if you put like sidewalks and pathways, it makes it more of an urban type of,
Those are people driving their cars. They're not walkers.
yeah. But
Yeah.
they were very strong. And so one of the questions was like, how do we make it happen? What type of advocacy do we need? Who do we need to talk to? Well, unfortunately, there's other neighborhood associations that I think are different. They have different opinions, and so I was surprised they gave such strong feedback to say that they weren't
Yeah.
interested in that. I was a little bit surprised.
But these people all have dogs. They're all walking their dogs down the street. So I'm not quite sure, like I see them.
On South Shore?
I don't know, like they're using the streets too. I guess they're not bothered by the fact that they might get hit by a car.
But I think
Yeah.
there's two different groups. I remember when they were talking about putting a sidewalk along Maple Leaf Road, and the person who had been advocating for it, she went up and down her neighbors, and they're like, no, 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 we do not want the sidewalk because we'd like our wide street or whatever. But like you said, they're probably not the walkers.
Mhm.
And so you'll have someone that's a walker and someone that drives everywhere living right next to each other. And so you have to say, okay, whose needs become more important? Keeping the kids safe or maintaining this rural looking street, which were no longer rural.
Well,
if we
I
ever did
thought we were talking about South Shore and McVeigh, which are pretty major streets, not some of the more minor streets.
But there's a lot of people along South Shore that like that. It's weird, especially like with the trees hanging over. So you get the shade, the kind of tunnel effect.
Maybe we can have our cake and eat it too, have the
Yeah.
trees on the side. But yeah, I understand.
So I think we
Anyways.
need the action to work together to look at this.
Pardon, Robert?
I think we can take the action you were saying between the parks and the traffic committee to work together at looking at McVeigh and South Shore Drive, and what can we do to advocate for sidewalks and trails, so we can do that.
Yeah, okay. Do you want to give an update about any other traffic items?
Yeah, I'll be really quick, and unfortunately, I got a work meeting that's already kind of starting. I'll have to switch to, but I do want to give an update. So a couple things I want to call out. One is, of course, the voters approved the Stafford Child Roads improvements. I think, we'll work closely to give input and guidance. So we want to balance the parklands again with the improvements that are being made. So we'll monitor that. It was interesting to me, and only one extra thing I want to say was, I think it was, well, we received some email talking about down near, I think it's Ellingston and Wilsonville Road, that they had put a stoplight. And it's actually interesting, they're going to be taking that stoplight out and they're going to be converting it to a roundabout, like what we're doing at Childs. So to me, it looks like a waste of money to put in the stoplight, but I think they wanted a stopgap measure there to quickly address the safety concerns, and then they'll convert that out. But that's down towards Wilsonville. But their long-term solution will be like what we're doing at Stafford and Child. The other thing is, it was mentioned here, the Receipt parking lot now open. It's kind of been a quiet open, and I've been kind of looking out to see if there's any concerns or anything happening, negative impacts from parking. I haven't observed too much. Talking about the kind of McVeigh, there's actually progress on restoring the pedestrian and bicycle pathway on the west side of Stafford Road between Overlook and the Rec Center. So, I've been telling them to try to prioritize it and get that open as soon as possible. And it looks like they're very close to completing that, putting that back in. So that'll be great. And then, as you may have heard me say, I've been talking with Anthony Vanderberg from Lake Oswego School District about the overall parking concerns with Lake Ridge High School. He's actually out this week at some conference, but he's saying he'll meet with me on November 18th. And I did talk to him, saying I'd like to give some updates here to the board. He shared with me some of the key things. So he did mention, as I was mentioning to Jessica, that he's had discussions with the city regarding enforceable no parking signs. So, he's stating there's discussions happening. Maybe that's more with the city engineers, Jessica, not so much with the planning department. And he said that, there'll be a lot of further conversations for that. Yeah, that was his main updates, is that, that there were discussions going on. And then we're planning on meeting. Anthony and I will meet next week. And he'll give more updates, and I'll just share some of the feedback. But he's obviously, I know there's a number of people here that have been talking and providing that feedback too. So he's very aware of that. And he's actually very nice to work with. So he's very collaborative. Happy about that.
That's excellent. Thank you, Rob. Thank you for staying on top of that.
Thank you very much. And let me know when what comes out of your meeting with them.
Right. Chair, just a point of order here. I did capture notes, but again, I'm going to leave the meeting. It's already started. So I'll follow kind of our process that we've outlined and upload the notes and the meeting minutes for that. But unfortunately, I have to leave.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Meg, I know you have the land use report. Rick, do you have anything that you're wanting to share?
I could use a minute.
So,
Good,
and hold on just a second. And Joe, you have an update too, or no? Yes.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so it's 8:07. So, Meg, Rick, Joe, and if we have time, I will share Carrie's report. And if not, and everybody wants to cut it off, then we'll save it for next time. Meg, go ahead.
Okay, just a quick update. So Chris went to the pre-application meeting for the Stafford project, and like Jessica mentioned, they've completely eliminated the 4-story condos, so they're not going to do a zoning change on that. They're going to be breaking it down into number of units of townhouses and then cottage clusters, so that they can follow the I always forget the housing requirement. So anyways, there should be another meeting middle of December, so they can get moving on that, and so he can submit his application. So in a nutshell, that's the report.
Thank you. 3 stories is the maximum they're using, right?
Correct. But I think for the most part, they're going to be 2 and 3 stories.
Right.
I think they're still working on the actual design.
Thank you so much. Rick?
So earlier this week, you had asked if we were looking at applying for any of the NEP grants for emergency supplies. I checked in with somebody that was on the task force for the second phase of the NEP grants. So the first phase has to do with all your ongoing expenses and things like that that you're getting to be reimbursed for now. Okay, I think that started about 6 months ago, that portion of the NEP grant. As of January, they were going to do emergency preparedness. They were going to do have all the rules ready for people to apply for supplies again. And the city staff member is named Quinn, and I don't know his last name because I haven't met him yet. But he's got a task group of people that are helping build this the requirements for the supplies. And a person on the task force says basically the rules are stagnant right now. In other words, they're not getting anything accomplished, and they're not going to be ready January 1st with the new rules, okay, for the supplies. So we're just going to have to sit and wait until that pops out before we make any decisions, or before we can apply and that sort of thing. Also, when I came up Stafford Road this afternoon, I looked over towards Lusher Farms, and they're setting the new fences right now along Stafford, up against the farm itself. So, so anyhow, that's all I got.
Thank you for staying on top of the emergency preparedness materials and the grant proposal.
Welcome.
Jenny, did you have any school reports or no? Okay, Joe? You're muted.
All right,
Yeah,
good evening, everybody. All right, I'll present the site performance over for the month of October. Let me go ahead and present. Share. Okay, everybody see my screen here or my window? That's a yes, I assume.
I can see it. Yes.
Okay, all right, great, thank you. Okay, I have 4 reports here. I'll go through them very quickly. You've seen these before. So for October, we had our our performance at a total of 639 sessions. Most were direct, meaning again, those are people that visited the site directly through a bookmark or typing in the link or typing in the URL. And then right behind there was email campaigns, followed by searches through like Google or Microsoft Bing. Okay, and we see this lovely spike at the beginning of the month, and we probably know where that came from, right? So that's usually when the newsletter goes out. Getting into a little bit deeper, looking at it instead of pure traffic, but looking at it from a user perspective. Okay, how users first interact with the site. Again, not a lot of difference, but sometimes it might bring some insight as to what's the first interaction that they have with the site and where that originated from. So it is following the same thing, direct organic search and then email right behind there. So no big surprises. And then when we look at our campaign reports, this is the report that tells us how our marketing through different campaigns is going. And we can see here the newsletter goes out at the beginning of the month. So our that should track with the October one, since this is the October data, which it does. We still see some residual, believe it or not, from September, actually behind that. So we had 38 visits just from the September newsletter. So these are people that, I don't know, were catching up or just got back from vacation or, or whatever. So it's always interesting to see. And then the yard signs, oddly enough, I've not seen it go that high in a single month, but we had 20 visits off the yard signs this month. That number is usually like 5, so it was much higher. So was there movement of the signs in this last month that may have contributed to the increase? I just throw it out there.
They're always being, I think all of us are trying to do better with higher visibility and also the changing out of signs, and maybe people are starting to get used to them.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, the number went up like
Yeah,
5x from last month or
I
4x
know.
from last month. So
That's
what
super.
that's why you have this data. It's like, oh, it's not that much, but it's a way to measure how the placement of your yard signs, or does that actually make a difference where the yard signs are going? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
No, it just seemed that this is really helpful because, we all put a lot of time into this.
Yeah.
Yourself included, the website, the signs, the newsletters, and we're reaching our neighbors, and that's super important.
Yep.
And
And then my favorite report is the landing page report. This is basically the first page that people go to when they visit our site initially. So let's go there. And unsurprisingly, when you see slash, that's the home page. Okay, just think of this as the whole URL that you see in the address bar. So the home page almost always is going to be number one, and then information about measure 3618, all news, and then of course I always like to see things like this: best words to describe Chris Durkee, coming up in 7th position. So, so apparently pets do better. Pet of the month seems to do better than people. So maybe get more pets up there on the newsletter. But nevertheless, that concludes my my report. If there's any questions, feel free to ask me in the chat or send me an email.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Let me share my screen and super quickly share what's happening with let's see, with the share. Okay. Carrie has been working hard on this, as have Joe, to paginate it, and that is our get involved volunteer page. So what we wanted to do here is to list, so this is all new, most of you haven't seen this, all the positions that are open and other ways that people can help. So this accordion shows you in a nutshell, and then you can open it up and see the description of it. And then we've got a couple of new things in here, like admin and social media, that, you know, we're all tapped out. We are, you know, please everybody, you know, look for people who can give an hour or two a month or a week. So Carrie writes, here's the report of our recent volunteer recruitment efforts. To start, we've updated our website to clearly communicate our needs. The new volunteer page features each position separately, presented in a format similar to a job listing. Each of the listed positions is currently vacant, or the current holder wishes to train their successor. Here are some listings, and she names what's on this page. Now that it is live, we'll have a section for it in the newsletter. So certainly we could use an events committee, but since we're really not doing events too much, this is my biggest ask, is somebody who can help with the admin and some of the minor. We don't do a lot of social media, but we have a little bit going out there that can help inform neighbors and get the word out a little bit more. So anyways, if anybody has any feedback on that, please let me know now or later or whenever. And that concludes our meeting, unless anybody else has anything to add. Thank you all, and I will then say good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
great
Good
night.
night.
Bye-bye.
Happy
Bye.
Thanksgiving.
Happy
Oh,
Thanksgiving.
absolutely.
And
Happy
no
holidays.
meeting in December, everybody.
So we'll see you next year.
Next year. That's it.
See you. All right. Take
Bye.
care.
All right,
Bye-bye.
take care.